everyone's favorite console accessory to say, the PC Engine CD-ROM has had a bit of a rocky start. Fighting Street was hardly a showcase. Noriko and Bikurimon Daijikai had limited appeal, and the game that was supposed to be its flagship title was delayed for months, which made it necessary to rush another whole new game into production to fill the gap. But here it is at last, a game that would drive sales of the CD-ROM unit for the rest of 1989. Tengai Makyou is one of the biggest series to emerge from the PC Engine. Of course, since none of the roughly dozen games in the series got released outside of Japan, Tengai Makyou doesn't have a lot of international recognition. This is the first PC Engine game, and in fact the first game, by Red Entertainment. Now they already existed as a production company. In fact, this series has already encountered their work, as they had a major hand in creating Machine Hero Wataru, the television show that would inspire the game that would become Keith Courage in Alpha Zone. Red Entertainment maintained a close relationship with Hudson, and so they're going to keep coming up as I go through the PC Engine library. Even when they're not programming the game themselves, they were doing things like creating the iconic characters. Red Entertainment is still around, but these days, in terms of gaming, they mainly confine themselves to things like visual novels. Red Entertainment chose a big project for their first game, an RPG designed to rival Dragon Quest. And while Tengai Makyou never does Dragon Quest-sized numbers, it was the game that was used as the face of the PC Engine CD-ROM. So what made Tengai Makyou the killer app? The thing that meant you had to get that CD-ROM module? Well, most of what it comes down to is an absolutely absurd amount of voice acting. There are over 50 speaking roles in the game. Now, admittedly, most of those only have one line. And in the case of one example I know, it's just the sound of them snoring. Now, I know that this is strange from the perspective of a time when people get angry that a game with a 500,000 word script isn't fully voiced. But in 1989, you were lucky if somebody said more than 2 or 3 words in a console game. Even the previous CD games didn't have this much dialogue. And with that many characters, it feels like they hired every single voice actor who was active in Japan at the time. If you've watched plenty of Japanese media, you're pretty much guaranteed to recognize a lot of the voices. Tengai Makyou Ziria was an enormous production. That isn't the end of the absurd production values for Tengai Makyou. Red Entertainment also commissioned Yellow Magic Orchestra's Ryuichi Sakamoto to create 3 original songs for the game, and they paid him 100 million yen for those songs. That would easily make Tengai Makyou the most expensive game ever made to this point, and the first game whose development cost more than $1 million. Now, I should mention that the 100 million yen for 3 songs is technically a rumor, but it's a rumor that nobody involved has ever denied, and nobody's willing to say anything about it, so feel free to draw your own conclusions. So besides the enormous cast of voices starring literally everybody, and the world's most expensive video game soundtrack, there's even more that Red Entertainment included thanks to that enormous CD storage space. There are, for example, 3,000 NPCs wandering the world. Now when you consider that every one of those little people walking back and forth represents, let's say 50 bytes of data, that's factoring in their appearance, location, and their line of dialogue. The total data for those NPCs is about 2/3 of the total game for Dragon Quest III. And then there's the art. Many enemies in Tengai Makyou feature a style that's very similar to a drawn cartoon, complete with multiple frames of animation for when they do anything. This is the kind of thing that's absurdly extravagant when your game is on a ROM cart. You just don't have the memory for that much artwork, let alone multiple frames of animation like that. But when you have a CD drive, well, then you've got more space than you know what to do with. So why not spend 20 or 30 kilobytes on a single enemy? There's plenty more space where that came from. And speaking of space, Tengai Makyou came in an enormous double-sized CD case. Our first PC Engine game to feature that. However, that space wasn't for a second CD. Instead, there's an enormous 72-page manual. It features an introductory comic, more details on basic game systems than I think I've ever seen in an RPG manual, details on most of the enemies that you'll encounter for the first third of the game, and a long section on the game's development, including all the details on where the game's inspiration, Far East of Eden, comes from. Tengai Makyou Ziria was an enormous production, front to back, top to bottom, and all dimensions in between. If you're wondering about the English title, Far East of Eden, is the title of an early work on Japan by P.H. Chada, the third director of Oriental Studies at the Smithsonian Institution. And all of that is a lie. That's the fake background that the series creator Hiroi Oji came up with. His concept for Tengai Makyou would be a story formed out of early Western perceptions of Japan, and so he created a fake book as his source for that. Later on, the title Far East of Eden was used for some tie-in works, but didn't exist when they made the game. And this wasn't even supposed to be a game. Originally, it was planned as a live-action film, then an animated TV series. It transitioned to game only when the CD-ROM unit was coming out, since the envisioned project would be too large for a cartridge. The kind of thing where you might make a tie-in Famicom game, but it wouldn't have been your lead. So Tengai Makyou Ziria is big and expensive, but what exactly is it? Well, the plot of the game is that the Fire Tribe once sealed away an evil demon, but over time the Fire Tribe split, and a group of foreigners have gained favor with the Emperor and are allowed to spread their strange new religion across the country of Zippong. Zippong is what the first European visitors to Japan referred to the country as. Jiraiya is a member of the Toad faction of the Fire Clan, and he's given the task of reassembling the factions and ending the plans of those foreigners who want to revive the demon. All of that is relatively standard RPG plot for 1989, but I also think it's all very well implemented. There are plenty of small tasks that you have to take care of on the way. Now, I never have enough time in my recording sessions when I play RPGs, and it definitely doesn't help that Tengai Makyou has some very long cutscenes at the start of the game. But here's what I encountered in the short time I had when starting out. Jiraiya left his master at the Toad Shrine, headed to town to buy some starting equipment, and while there found someone who looked exactly like him. We went into a cave where a massive boulder blocked the path, and then the copy of Jiraiya turned out to be a Tanuki. After beating up the Tanuki, I get access to the second floor of this small dungeon, and there was a giant catfish there. It was asleep and snoring away, but tickling its nose caused it to sneeze and cause an earthquake. That smashed the rock, letting me access the next town, and there I met the local lord who upgraded my equipment and gave me more information on my mission. I crossed to a new region, made friends with a frog, and then encountered a swordmaster who would teach me his techniques if I could beat him. I couldn't because I needed to grind up a few more levels, and so that's where I stopped. But that's a lot of events for a relatively short period of time. Now later on the dungeons become massive, so your progress will slow down a bit, but there's still a lot going on here. A special feature of Tengai Makyou Ziria is that you can hold down the B button to run around. The world gets to be pretty big, so that winds up coming in very handy. While you're running around, hitting the A button will bring up the standard RPG menu, where you can choose to talk to people, equip items, use things, or cast spells. There's also a search command which will look at the spot in front of you, something that causes a problem at a few points in the game when you have to interact with something that you'd normally be standing on. When you're running around outside of town, you'll have random encounters, and Tengai Makyou uses a very standard RPG combat system. You can fight, use items, cast spells, run away, and you pound on an enemy until it falls over, at which point you gain some money and experience points. The combat might be Tengai Makyou's biggest weakness, mainly because there are a lot of them, they are very slow, and there's loading time whenever a battle starts. In fact, Tengai Makyou spends a lot of time loading from CD. The duration of every load is only 4 or 5 seconds, but it really starts to add up. Hudson actually attempted to address this since they made a second version of Tengai Makyou Ziria that was for the Super CD-ROM system. That version was a giveaway when you sent in your warranty card for a Duo system. Almost 20 years later, Hudson would remake Tengai Makyou Ziria as one of the very few Japanese Xbox 360 exclusives. So the original cast even reprised their roles for that game. Getting back to the original PC Engine release of Tengai Makyou, there is a notorious bug with the game. The damage that you receive in combat isn't significantly affected by any of the armor that you're wearing. The working theory is that there's some math problem with the damage equations, and then the game wound up balanced around that. But the consequence is, you might as well save your money and walk around naked. Armor takes up item slots even when it's equipped, so a health recovery item will do you more good in that spot. Tengai Makyou Ziria is a beloved classic in Japan. It's considered to be one of the foundational RPGs, the kind of thing that would inspire the likes of Final Fantasy VII. And you can definitely feel that as you play it. Even though the game mechanics are still firmly rooted in the 8-bit RPG era, the structure feels one step beyond. Even though the PC Engine has an 8-bit processor, this feels like the first 16-bit RPG. It's a monumental achievement for 1989, and well worth checking out.